You think you can just walk in here and lie to me? The words cracked through the room like a gavel, sharp, final, echoing off the pale green walls of the station lobby. Deputy Ryan Cole didn't raise his voice much, but when he did, people listened. Chairs scraped softly against the tile floor as two civilians in the corner shifted, their conversations dissolving into silence. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed, casting a cold, steady glow that flattened every face, every expression, into something harder, less human. Across from him stood Evelyn Carter, 72 years old, barely 5'3", her frame wrapped in a faded gray coat that had seen more winters than most people in the building. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the counter, fingers curled as if holding onto something invisible, something steady. She didn't flinch. Not when his voice cut through the air, not when the room turned toward her, not even when the young receptionist behind the desk lowered her eyes as though she didn't want to be seen watching. Evelyn's gaze stayed soft, steady, fixed somewhere just past Ryan's shoulder, as if she were listening to something deeper than his accusation. A clock ticked on the wall behind him, each second landing with quiet precision. Tick, tick, tick. Time moved forward whether dignity was honored or not. "I'm not lying," she said, her voice calm, almost gentle, the kind of tone that didn't belong in a place built on authority and urgency. It didn't challenge him. It didn't resist. It simply existed. That, more than anything, seemed to irritate him. Ryan leaned forward slightly, one hand flattening against the counter, the polished wood reflecting the edge of his badge. "Ma'am, people don't just lose a wallet and walk in here with a story that doesn't add up." His eyes flicked down briefly, taking in the worn leather purse at her side, the scuffed shoes, the quiet stillness she carried with her. There was a judgment there, quick and practiced, the kind that didn't need words to land. Behind him, a printer whirred to life, spitting out forms no one immediately reached for. The room stayed suspended, caught between movement and stillness. Evelyn adjusted her grip on her purse strap, the fabric whispering softly against her coat. She inhaled slowly, as if measuring the weight of the moment before letting it settle inside her chest. "I came here because I thought this was where people help," she said, her eyes finally meeting his, not with defiance, but with something quieter, something steadier. It lingered just long enough to be felt. Ryan let out a short breath through his nose, almost a laugh, but without humor. Somewhere near the door, it creaked open an inch, then stopped, unnoticed. The hallway beyond spilled a thin line of warmer light across the tile, cutting through the cold fluorescence like a quiet interruption. No one turned. Not yet. Inside the room, the air felt tighter, heavier, like something unseen was pressing in from all sides. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't step back, didn't raise her voice, didn't shrink. She simply stood there, small against the weight of the room, holding on to a kind of dignity that didn't ask for permission to exist. And in that stillness, something subtle shifted, though no one could name it yet, not even the man who thought he was in control. The silence did not break. It stretched, thin and fragile, like glass under pressure. And in that space, Evelyn Carter remained exactly where she was, her posture upright but unforced, her shoulders relaxed in a way that did not match the tension gathering around her, as if she had long ago learned how to stand still when the world tried to push her out of place. The faint scent of disinfectant lingered in the air, mixing with the stale trace of coffee from a paper cup left near the edge of the desk, its lid slightly bent, forgotten in the shift of attention. Deputy Ryan Cole straightened, rolling his shoulders back as though reclaiming the room with the movement, his hand leaving the counter but his presence pressing harder in its absence. "Let us try this again," he said, slower this time, each word measured, deliberate, shaped for control rather than volume. "You were saying you lost your wallet somewhere between your home and here." Evelyn nodded once, a small motion, almost gentle. "Yes, sir." Her voice did not rise, did not sharpen, did not plead. It simply stayed steady, like a line drawn carefully across a page. Ryan tilted his head slightly, studying her, not as a person, but as a problem to be solved or dismissed. "And you cannot tell me exactly where." It was not a question, even though it sounded like one. Evelyn's fingers brushed lightly against the seam of her purse, a soft, repetitive motion, as though grounding herself in something familiar. "I took the bus," she said, her eyes lowering for a brief moment, not in submission, but in thought. Number 12. It was crowded today. I noticed it was gone when I reached into my bag after I got off. Somewhere behind her, a chair shifted again, the sound small but noticeable in the quiet. A man in a baseball cap glanced toward her, then quickly away, as if unsure whether witnessing was the same as participating. Ryan exhaled, a controlled breath that carried impatience beneath its surface. So you cannot prove where it happened. The statement landed heavier than it needed to. Evelyn lifted her gaze again, meeting his eyes with the same calm she had carried since she walked in. I am not here to prove anything, she said softly. I am here to ask for help. The words settled into the room differently, not sharp, not loud, but undeniable. For a moment, Ryan did not respond. His jaw tightened slightly, a subtle shift, but enough to register. The fluorescent lights flickered once overhead, barely noticeable, but long enough to cast a brief shadow across his face before returning to their steady glow. Near the door, the narrow line of warmer light widened just a fraction, stretching across the tile, like a quiet invitation no one acknowledged. Evelyn adjusted her stance, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her shoes making the faintest sound against the floor, a soft scuff that echoed more than it should have in the stillness. She did not rush her words, did not fill the silence unnecessarily. She let it exist, let it breathe, even as it pressed in around her. Ryan reached for a clipboard on the desk, flipping it open with a quick motion, papers rustling in a way that felt louder than the action required. Name, he said, without looking up. Evelyn Carter. Her voice carried clearly, not because it was loud, but because it was certain. He wrote it down, the pen scratching against the paper in short, sharp strokes. Address. She gave it, each detail precise, practiced, as though she had repeated it many times before in places where she needed to be heard correctly the first time. As he wrote, his eyes flicked up briefly, scanning her again, measuring, categorizing. The room seemed to settle into a rhythm. Question, answer, pen against paper, breath between words. And yet something beneath it all remained unsettled, like a current just below the surface. Evelyn's hands grew still now, no longer adjusting her purse, no longer searching for something to hold. They rested quietly, fingers interlaced, patient. The clock continued its steady count behind Ryan, each second marking time that no one in the room could pause or rewind. Near the entrance, the door opened a little wider, hinges moving with a soft, controlled sound, and the warmer light from the hallway stretched farther across the floor, reaching just to the edge of where Evelyn stood. She did not turn. Not yet. But something in the air shifted again, subtle, almost imperceptible, as if the room itself was preparing for a change it did not fully understand. Ryan's pen stopped for half a second, just long enough to notice the shift he could not yet explain, and then it moved again, faster this time, pressing harder into the paper as if control could be reinforced through pressure alone. All right, Miss Carter, he said, still not looking fully at her, his voice flattening into procedure. We will log the report, but without specifics, there is not much that can be done. The words were routine, practiced, but there was an edge beneath them now, something defensive, as if the room itself had begun to resist him in ways he did not like. Evelyn did not respond immediately. She stood with the same quiet composure, her breathing slow and even, her eyes drifting for just a moment toward the strip of warmer light that had now reached the tips of her shoes. It glowed against the worn leather, softening the hard lines of the tile beneath her. She seemed to notice it, not with surprise, but with recognition, as if she had been expecting something to arrive, even if she did not know when. I understand, she said finally, her voice still gentle, but now carrying something firmer underneath, something rooted deeper than the moment itself. I have lived long enough to know that not everything can be found once it is lost. The sentence settled differently than the others. It was not about the wallet anymore. It was about something larger, something the room could feel, but not name. Ryan looked up at that, really looked this time, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in confusion, as though the situation had stepped outside the boundaries he preferred. Then why come here at all? He asked, the question slipping out before he could filter it into something more neutral. Evelyn's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile, but close enough to soften the space between them. Because sometimes, she said, you come anyway, just to see who is willing to help. The words did not accuse. They did not demand. They simply existed, and in doing so, they shifted the weight of the room once more. Behind Ryan, the receptionist glanced up again, this time holding her gaze a fraction longer before quickly returning to her screen. The man in the baseball cap shifted again, crossing his arms, his posture less certain than before. The printer had gone quiet now. Even the clock seemed louder, each tick more pronounced against the stillness. Ryan closed the clipboard with a sharper motion than necessary, the sound snapping through the air like a punctuation mark. We will call you if anything turns up, he said, his tone final, signaling an end he expected her to accept without question. Evelyn nodded once, her movements unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world, even here, even now. Her hand moved to her purse, lifting it gently from her side, the strap sliding across her shoulder with a soft whisper of fabric. She turned slightly, just enough to angle her body toward the door, toward that line of light that had now fully crossed her path. For a brief second, she paused, her gaze lifting toward the entrance. And that was when the door opened wider, not abruptly, but with intention, the hinges moving in a smooth, controlled arc. The warmer light from the hallway spilled in, richer now, fuller, touching the edges of desks, chairs, faces. A figure stepped inside, tall, composed, his presence quiet but undeniable. His shoes made a measured sound against the tile, steady, deliberate, each step carrying a kind of certainty that did not need to announce itself. He did not speak at first. He did not interrupt. He simply walked forward, his eyes taking in the room, the people, the stillness that had settled too heavily in the air. Evelyn's posture did not change, but something in her expression softened, just slightly, like a breath released after being held longer than anyone realized. Ryan noticed the movement before he noticed the man, his attention catching on that subtle shift, that quiet change he could not immediately explain. He followed her line of sight then, turning just enough to see the figure approaching, and for the first time since she had walked in, something in his expression faltered, not fully, not yet, but enough to break the smooth surface of his control. The room did not move. No one spoke. The moment stretched again, but this time, it felt different, not fragile, not uncertain, but charged, as if something long delayed had finally arrived and was now standing just a few steps away. The man did not hurry, and that was the first thing that felt different. His pace measured, each step landing with quiet certainty across the tile as the warmer light followed him in, stretching behind him like a line drawn from another world into this one. His suit was simple but precise, dark navy, pressed clean, the kind that did not need to impress because it already belonged. A thin leather folder rested in his left hand, held low, almost casually, but his posture carried something unmistakable, something that did not ask for attention and yet commanded it anyway. Evelyn did not turn fully toward him, but her shoulders eased, just a fraction, the smallest release of tension, like a breath that had been held too long finally finding its way out. Ryan watched him approach, his expression tightening, his mind moving quickly through possibilities, trying to place the man, to understand the interruption before it became something he could not control. "Sir," Ryan said, stepping slightly forward, his voice shifting into a more formal tone, sharper, more contained. "This is an active report area. If you need assistance, you will have to check in at the front." The words were correct, procedural, but they landed weaker than intended, as though the room itself no longer supported them. The man stopped a few feet away, close enough now that the details became clearer, the polished edge of his shoes, the faint reflection of light across his watch, the calm steadiness in his eyes as they moved from Ryan to Evelyn and then back again. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he took in the space, the silence, the subtle tension hanging between people who suddenly did not know where to look. The receptionist straightened in her chair. The man in the baseball cap uncrossed his arms. Even the hum of the lights seemed to lower, as if the room were listening. "I believe she already checked in," the man said finally, his voice even, controlled, not loud, but carrying clearly through the space. It was not confrontational. It was not defensive. It was simply certain. Ryan's jaw tightened again, a reflex now, his authority pressing forward in response. "And you are?" he asked, the question edged with a need to re-establish control, to define the boundaries again before they slipped further. The man's gaze did not waver. "Someone who was asked to come," he replied, the words calm, deliberate, offering just enough and no more. Evelyn turned then, slowly, her eyes lifting fully to meet his, and for the first time since she had walked into the station, something warmer moved across her face, not relief, not quite, but recognition, quiet and grounded. She did not step toward him. She did not call out. She simply stood, her presence steady, as though she trusted what was unfolding without needing to shape it. Ryan shifted his stance, the movement small but revealing, his weight redistributing, his confidence adjusting in response to something he could not yet name. "If you are here regarding this report," he said, gesturing briefly toward the clipboard, "then you should understand we are handling it according to procedure." The man inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the statement without agreeing to it. "Procedure matters," he said, his tone unchanged, "but so does how it is carried out." The sentence settled into the room like a quiet weight, not heavy, but undeniable. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, then paused, just for a moment. The rhythm of his control interrupted. Behind him, the clock continued its steady count, marking a shift no one had announced, but everyone could feel. Evelyn's hands rested calmly now, no longer gripping her purse, no longer searching for balance. She looked from Ryan to the man beside the doorway, her gaze soft but unwavering, as if the moment had finally aligned with something she had known all along. The space between them held, charged but contained, as the man took one more step forward, closing the distance just enough to stand beside her, not in front, not behind, but exactly where he needed to be, and in that quiet alignment, the room changed again. Ryan felt it now, not as a thought, but as a pressure building beneath his skin, subtle but undeniable, like something slipping just beyond his grasp. The man standing beside Evelyn did not raise his voice, did not step forward with force, did not demand attention, and yet the balance in the room had shifted in a way Ryan could not easily correct. He straightened again, squaring his shoulders, pulling himself back into the version of authority he knew how to wear. "Sir," he said, more firmly this time, "if you are not directly involved, I will have to ask you to step back while we finish this report." The words came out sharper, cleaner, but they lacked the weight they carried only minutes ago. The man did not move, not even an inch. His gaze remained steady, resting on Ryan with a quiet focus that did not challenge, but did not yield either. "I am involved," he said, his voice calm, almost level with the hum of the lights above them. "More than you realize." The statement did not escalate the moment. It deepened it. Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly, his fingers tightening around the edge of the clipboard as if anchoring himself to something solid. "Then you should identify yourself," he replied, the edge returning, though thinner now, less certain. The man exhaled slowly, not out of frustration, but as if choosing his next step with care. He shifted the leather folder in his hand, lifting it just enough to rest it against the counter, the soft contact making a quiet, deliberate sound. "Before I do that," he said, "I would like to understand what happened here." His eyes moved briefly toward Evelyn, not to check on her, but to acknowledge her presence, to place her at the center of the moment where she had always belonged. Ryan followed the glance, then looked back quickly, as if refusing to let the focus move away from his control. "What happened?" Ryan said, each word now carrying a defensive rhythm, "is that she came in with a vague report, no clear details, and expects immediate resolution." He paused, then added, almost reflexively, "We are handling it according to protocol." Evelyn remained still beside the man, her posture unchanged, her hands resting lightly together, fingers folded with quiet patience. She did not interrupt. She did not correct him. She allowed the version of the story to exist, even as it fell short of the truth. The man listened without interruption, his expression composed, absorbing every word, every tone, every subtle shift in Ryan's delivery. When Ryan finished, the silence returned, heavier now, layered with everything that had just been said and everything that had not. The man's fingers rested lightly on the folder, tapping it once, softly, not as a signal, but as a marker, a transition. You said she came in asking for help, he said, his voice still even. And your response was to question her credibility before offering that help. It was not an accusation. It was a summary. Ryan's jaw tightened again, the motion smaller now, more contained. I assessed the situation, he replied, the words coming quicker than before, as if speed might reinforce authority. That is part of the job. The man nodded once. Slowly, acknowledging the statement without agreeing to its conclusion. Assessment matters, he said. But so does respect. The word lingered, simple, unembellished, but heavier than anything else that had been said. Behind them, the receptionist shifted again, her eyes flicking up briefly before returning to her screen, though her fingers had stopped typing. The man in the baseball cap now watched openly, his earlier hesitation replaced by quiet attention. The room had changed audiences. Ryan felt it. He adjusted his stance again, though there was nowhere left to anchor himself that felt as solid as before. If you have something to say, Ryan said, his tone tightening at the edges, then say it. The challenge was there now, not loud, but present, born from the need to regain control before it slipped completely. The man's expression did not change. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, slowly, deliberately, drawing out a small, dark case. He did not open it immediately. He let it rest in his hand for a brief moment, long enough for the weight of the gesture to settle into the room. Evelyn's eyes lowered slightly, not in uncertainty, but in quiet understanding. She had seen this moment before, not this exact one, but something like it, the point where truth no longer needed to wait. The man lifted the case, opening it with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been in the stillness. He turned it just enough for Ryan to see. And in that instant, before a single word was spoken, the balance of the room shifted completely. The badge caught the light first, not in a dramatic flash, but in a steady reflection that seemed to hold the room in place for a fraction longer than anyone expected. Ryan's eyes dropped to it instinctively, then narrowed as he tried to process what he was seeing, the insignia, the seal, the lettering precise and unmistakable. His grip on the clipboard loosened, just slightly, the edge no longer pressed into his palm with the same certainty. The man did not rush to explain. He allowed the moment to breathe, to settle, to do what it needed to do without interference. Internal affairs, he said quietly, his voice matching the calm authority of the badge now resting in plain view. Marcus Carter. The name landed with a weight that was not loud, but complete. Behind Ryan, the receptionist's posture straightened again, her hands now still on the keyboard, her eyes fixed on the scene without trying to hide it. The man in the baseball cap shifted his weight forward, attention fully engaged, no longer pretending to be elsewhere. The room had changed completely now. Ryan blinked once, then again, as if recalibrating, his mind moving quickly through everything that had just happened, replaying his words, his tone, his assumptions. He began, but the sentence did not finish. It lingered, incomplete, like something he could not yet form. Marcus closed the badge case with a soft click and slipped it back into his jacket, the movement controlled, deliberate, not meant to intimidate, only to clarify. You were saying, Marcus continued, his tone even, inviting the conversation forward, not stopping it. That, more than anything, unsettled Ryan. There was no raised voice, no accusation, no immediate consequence delivered in anger. Just space. Just expectation. Ryan cleared his throat, adjusting his stance again, though the movement now felt more like searching than control. I was following procedure, he said, the words slower this time, less certain as they left his mouth. Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the statement as he had before. And how did that look from where she stood? He asked, his gaze shifting briefly toward Evelyn, then back to Ryan. The question was simple. It was also impossible to avoid. Ryan's eyes flicked toward Evelyn for the first time, not as a subject, but as a person within the moment. She stood the same as before, quiet, composed, her hands resting together, her presence unchanged by the reveal beside her. She did not look at him with anger. She did not look at him with expectation. She simply existed in the space, allowing him to see what had always been there. The clock ticked again. Tick, tick, tick. Ryan inhaled slowly, the air feeling heavier now, more deliberate as it filled his lungs. I asked questions, he said, though even as he spoke, the words felt incomplete, insufficient against what the room now held. Marcus tilted his head slightly, not dismissing, but not accepting the answer as finished. You did, he said. But there is a difference between asking and assuming. The distinction settled into the silence, clear and unyielding. Ryan's shoulders lowered, just a fraction, the tension no longer held in the same rigid line. His eyes moved again, this time lingering on Evelyn a moment longer, taking in the details he had overlooked before, the steadiness in her posture, the calm in her expression, the dignity that had not shifted once since she entered the room. Something in his expression changed, not fully, not dramatically, but enough to be seen. Behind them, the fluorescent lights continued their low hum, but the space felt different now, less cold, less distant. The warmer light from the hallway still stretched across the floor, touching the edges of the moment as it unfolded. Evelyn exhaled softly, the sound barely audible, but present, like a quiet release that did not need acknowledgement. She did not step forward. She did not speak. She simply remained, and in that stillness, the truth of the moment stood clearer than any explanation could have made it. Ryan's gaze did not leave Evelyn this time. Not immediately, not like before when it skimmed past her, as if she were part of the furniture, something present but not fully seen. Now he looked, really looked, and what he found there was not resistance, not anger, not even disappointment in the way he expected. It was steadiness. It was patience. It was a kind of quiet strength that did not rise to meet conflict, but did not shrink from it either. That unsettled him more than any raised voice could have. His fingers loosened around the clipboard completely now, the tension draining out of his grip as it lowered slightly toward his side. The room held its breath without meaning to. Marcus remained still beside Evelyn, not stepping forward, not pressing further, allowing the weight of the moment to do what no authority ever could on its own. Ryan swallowed once, the movement small but visible, his throat tightening as something shifted inside him, not forced, not commanded, but realized. "Ma'am," he said, and the word came out differently this time, slower, more careful, as if he were learning how to use it again. It hung in the air for a second before he continued. "I may have approached this the wrong way." The sentence was not polished. It was not rehearsed. It was incomplete in places. But it was honest, and that honesty landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. Evelyn's eyes softened just slightly, not in approval, not in relief, but in acknowledgement. She did not rush to respond. She allowed the moment to unfold at its own pace, just as she had from the beginning. Ryan took a small step back, not retreating, but creating space, a gesture that spoke louder than any formal apology could have. "You came here for help," he added, his voice quieter now, less about control and more about understanding. "And I did not start there." The admission settled into the room, changing it again, softening edges that had been sharp only moments before. Behind the desk, the receptionist exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering as if she had been holding tension she did not even realize she carried. The man in the baseball cap nodded faintly to himself, almost imperceptibly, but enough to show that something had shifted beyond just the people at the center of the moment. Marcus watched without interruption, his expression steady, not approving, not condemning, simply present, allowing Ryan to stand in what he had just said without interference. Evelyn finally moved, just slightly, her hands separating as she adjusted her purse strap again, the familiar motion returning, grounding, quiet. "We all learn," she said softly, her voice carrying the same calm it always had, but now with a warmth that had not been there before. It was not forgiveness spoken out loud. It was something deeper, something understood. Ryan nodded once, the motion small but certain, as if accepting that truth without needing to defend himself against it. He turned slightly, setting the clipboard back on the counter with more care than before, aligning it neatly, restoring order not just to the desk, but to the way he carried himself. "Let us start over," he said, his tone steady now, but different, grounded in something more than procedure. He reached for a new form, smoothing it out with his palm, the paper lying flat under his hand. "Miss Carter, can you walk me through your day again, from the moment you left your home?" The question came without assumption this time, without edge, open and direct. Evelyn nodded gently, her posture still upright, still composed, but now accompanied by a subtle shift in the room itself, as if something long held in place had finally been released. Marcus stepped back half a pace, giving space, not leaving, but allowing the process to move forward on its own. The clock continued its steady rhythm on the wall, but now each second felt less like pressure and more like movement, like something progressing instead of holding still. The warmer light from the hallway remained stretched across the floor, no longer an intrusion, but a quiet presence, blending with the fluorescent glow above. And in that shared space, between what had been and what was now beginning again, the balance finally settled into something real. Ryan did not rush this time, and that alone changed everything. His pen moving slower across the page as Evelyn began again, her voice steady, her words clear, each detail placed with care, not because she was trying to prove something, but because she was finally being heard. "I left my apartment around 9, she said, her gaze soft but focused, not drifting now, not guarded, just present. "The bus stop is about a block and a half from my building. I remember the wind was a little stronger than usual, so I kept my purse close." Ryan nodded as he wrote, not interrupting, not redirecting, allowing her to move through the memory in her own rhythm. The scratching of his pen was quieter now, less forceful, almost careful, as if the act of writing had become something more than just procedure. Behind them, the room had settled into a different kind of silence, not tense, not watchful, but attentive. The receptionist typed again, slowly, glancing up only occasionally. The man in the baseball cap had taken a seat, his posture relaxed, though his attention remained. Marcus stood a few feet back, hands loosely at his sides, his presence steady but unobtrusive, like a quiet anchor that no longer needed to assert itself. Evelyn continued, her voice carrying a gentle clarity that seemed to shape the space around her. "The bus was crowded," she said. "There was a young mother with a stroller, and a man who kept shifting his bag from one shoulder to the other. I remember thinking it must have been heavy." She paused for a moment, not out of uncertainty, but to let the memory settle, to let the details align. Ryan looked up briefly, meeting her eyes, not questioning, just following. "Did anyone come close to you?" he asked, his tone neutral, open, without assumption. Evelyn considered the question, her fingers lightly touching the edge of her purse again, grounding herself in the present while reaching back into the past. "A few people," she said. "It was a full bus, but no one stayed close for long." Ryan nodded again, writing it down, his movements consistent, respectful, the rhythm of the report now matching the rhythm of her voice instead of overriding it. The clock continued its steady ticking, but it no longer pressed against the moment. It simply marked time as it passed, unintrusive. Evelyn's eyes softened slightly as she continued. "When I got off, I reached into my bag to check for my keys," she said. "That is when I noticed my wallet was gone." The words landed simply, without drama, without emphasis, but they carried the weight of the entire situation. Ryan paused his pen for just a second, then resumed, capturing the final detail with care. He exhaled slowly, not out of frustration this time, but as if releasing something he had been holding on to without realizing it. "Thank you," he said, and the words were quiet, but sincere. Evelyn inclined her head gently, acknowledging the effort, not expecting more, not demanding it. There was a moment then, a small one, where nothing needed to be said, where the process itself had become the resolution of something deeper than the report. Marcus watched from where he stood, his expression unchanged, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, a quiet ease that had not been there before, as if the outcome he had hoped for had arrived not through force, but through choice. Ryan set the pen down carefully, aligning it beside the form, his movements precise, intentional. "We will review nearby bus footage," he said, his voice steady, grounded. "And check with transit security. I will personally follow up." The promise was not large. It was not dramatic, but it was real. Evelyn nodded once more, her shoulders relaxed, her presence still gentle, but now accompanied by something warmer, something that had been earned in the quiet space between what had been and what had changed. The light from the hallway remained stretched across the floor, blending fully now with the room, no longer separate, no longer waiting. And in that shared light, the moment settled into something complete, not because everything was fixed, but because something had finally been made right. The pen rested where Ryan had placed it, parallel to the edge of the form, as if even that small detail now mattered more than it had before. And for a moment no one reached for anything, no one spoke, no one moved to break what had settled into the room. Evelyn adjusted her purse strap one last time, the familiar motion quiet and unhurried, then let her hands fall gently at her sides, her posture unchanged, her presence still carrying that same calm dignity she had brought in with her. "Thank you," she said, and the words were simple, but they held a weight that did not come from the situation, but from the way it had been handled in the end. Ryan nodded, his eyes meeting hers without hesitation now, without the barrier that had stood there before. "You are welcome, Miss Carter," he replied, his voice steady, respectful, no longer shaped by assumption, but by intention. The exchange was brief, but it completed something that had begun the moment she walked through the door. Marcus stepped forward then, just enough to stand beside her again, not to lead, not to intervene, but to be present in the way he had been from the start, steady and grounded. Evelyn turned slightly toward him, her expression softening in a way that spoke of familiarity, of something deeper than the room could fully understand. "You did not have to come," she said quietly, her voice carrying only as far as it needed to. Marcus gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, his gaze gentle but certain. "I always will," he replied, and there was no emphasis, no performance in the words, just truth, simple and complete. Evelyn nodded once, accepting it without question, as if it had never been in doubt. Behind them, the receptionist resumed her typing fully now, the soft rhythm of keys returning to the space, blending with the steady ticking of the clock and the low hum of the lights above. The man in the baseball cap stood, stretching slightly before heading toward the exit, his footsteps quieter than before, as though he had learned something without needing to say it out loud. Ryan remained where he was for a moment longer, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the counter, his gaze following Evelyn and Marcus as they turned toward the door. He did not call out. He did not add anything more. He simply watched, understanding now that not every moment required him to fill the space with words. Evelyn walked with the same measured pace she had entered with, her steps steady, her shoulders relaxed, the light from the hallway now fully surrounding her as she moved forward. Marcus walked beside her, matching her rhythm without effort, his presence no longer an interruption, but a part of the scene itself. As they reached the doorway, Evelyn paused for just a fraction of a second, her hand brushing lightly against the frame, the warm light catching the lines of her face, softening them even further. She did not look back. She did not need to. The door opened wider, and the sounds of the outside world drifted in, distant traffic, a faint breeze, life continuing beyond the walls that had held this moment. Then they stepped through together, and the door closed behind them with a quiet, final click. Inside, the room remained still for a second longer, the echo of what had happened lingering in the air, not loud, not overwhelming, but present. Ryan exhaled slowly, straightening the papers on the desk once more, aligning them with care, as if restoring order meant something different now. The clock continued its steady rhythm. The lights hummed, and in the silence that followed, there was no tension left, only a quiet understanding that something had shifted, something small but real, and that it would remain long after the moment itself had passed.